And a lot of these guys will probably argue that they do have personality, but it's a kind of overdone false personality that doesn't really mean anything. And the reader, the viewer, can pick up on that. They can see when you're standing there and forcing this unrealistic personality on us. It's a made up illusion of a personality, and that creates distance, because we can feel it. You can feel the weirdness around that, and that's, I don't know, it's still amazing that so many people tend to view people who push that kind of false personality. You see a lot of popular videos with people who are like overly charismatic, right? And they do very well, but also goes to show how kind of easily swayed a lot of people are. It's like, hey, he's got a pleasant personality, I'll stick with him for a bit. But I think over the long term, that kind of stuff gets tiring. Sounds good to me. I did see a little bit of the Jack Butcher interview, and I know that you did a bit of a quick fire round at the end as well, right? So I was kind of mentally preparing for the possibility of that.
Oh, I think it was because we were live as well. I think we were live on YouTube and Twitter. I'm not doing that anymore at the minute, so there isn't a risk of, or rather a pleasure of a live question round, unfortunately, at the minute.
Oh, crying emoji.
Yeah.
Whatever works organically, I'm good with. And I like the idea of just having a conversation. That sounds good.
Well, I say this, I must say this at the beginning of every podcast now, that I'm betting that long-form conversations will become way more popular in the content world. I say that with quotation marks, because, surprise, surprise, people enjoy listening to unedited conversations way more than they enjoy listening to me asking you 20 questions about your life. So, Alex, where are you from? Oh, how did that happen? The whole podcast format. I think that format is ruining podcasts, to be perfectly honest, to the point where I don't really listen to that many anymore either, because that's the same on every podcast.
That's the thing. You do see it quite a lot. It has been done to death, especially with people who've just started a new podcast. They're going to have the set of questions, and it can feel a little bit robotic for sure. And I think that's what puts people off. It sort of takes away from the human one-to-one quality of it, and also the spontaneity of the conversation, which is, I think, the best part.
Yeah, it's the thing I've said so many times. Every conversation has a cadence, and for me, I always see my role in this to kind of understand that cadence, understand how you want to talk, and match you at that cadence. It's like a dance, like an improv dance that we're doing. And if
I like the sound of that, it's lovely.
and if I just sit here breaking that cadence over and over by asking you stupid questions, it breaks that flow. It gets into a blah 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 blah, Alex, blah 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 blah, Alex.
That's what you mean.
And the
You're essentially kind of resetting the conversation with each new question.
Yeah, and I feel like you get into that kind of YouTube thing, which I've seen some of your YouTube videos. You don't do this, but you get into this YouTube thing where you have this, the big grand intro. Hi guys, welcome to the channel. Make sure you hit subscribe and like. Today we're going to be talking about this, and then some pumping music after that, and then you go back into the video.
Yeah.
I just feel like
some B-roll.
Yeah. I just kind of, I feel like a lot of those formats have been done to death now. I mean, you're not new to making content online, are you? You're clearly not.
No, I'm certainly not a pro at it, but I don't tend to follow the kind of the crowd's way of doing things, and I tend to make it easier for myself and just choosing a simple route that doesn't take too much pre-thought or pre-planning, and do what sort of feels good. And I think for me, the key thing is, whatever spurs on creativity and originality, that for me is important. So that's why I never script anything out, because I tend to get bored by the idea of reading out off a script, and that kind of takes the edge off the thing. I like to explore the idea through the live process, just doing it.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean. It can be kind of off-putting when you see stuff that's been done to death, and it's like, where's the life in this? It's sort of drained of a human quality.
Yeah. I've spent a lot of my time probably over the last 5 months bemoaning content and taking the piss out of James Clear and other things like this, and it isn't even, it's not even really about James Clear, or it's not even really about that style of content, self-improvement content. I think it can still be really, 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 really good if you just had some personality to it. I mean, shock horror, you just add some personality to it, and it can actually be quite good. I honestly think you can talk about anything you choose online if shock horror you have a personality, but it just feels like it's the first thing that gets removed from everybody because they follow the same formula that everybody else is following. So the personality is the first thing that goes, when to me it always feels like the personality is the only thing that differentiates you, isn't it? There's nothing else.
That's true. And a lot of these guys will probably argue that they do have personality, but it's a kind of overdone false personality that doesn't really mean anything. And the reader, the viewer, can pick up on that. They can see when you're standing there and forcing this unrealistic personality on us. It's a made up illusion of a personality. And that creates distance because we can feel it. You can feel the weirdness around that. And that's, I don't know, it's still amazing that so many people tend to view people who push that kind of false personality. You see a lot of popular videos with people who are like overly charismatic, right? And they do very well, but also goes to show how kind of easily swayed a lot of people are. It's like, hey, he's got a pleasant personality, I'll stick with him for a bit. But I think over the long term, that kind of stuff gets tiring. And people are now having gone through a phase, I guess, through YouTube, of seeing a lot of people who are kind of over the top. I think we're getting into a phase now where it's a lot more refreshing just to see some down to earthness reveal itself, and that's going to separate perhaps a new phase of people.
Well, that's
by the way. Are we doing this at the moment? Are we live at the moment?
Yeah, we're recording. We're
doing it. Okay, cool. You had me there for a sec. Yeah.
Oh, there was danger of it falling into a real conversation then.
I know. Well, this is it. This is perfect because this is that kind of spontaneous flow of conversation that we're looking for.
Yeah, I was just going to say a thing back to what you were saying, that this idea of this kind of fake personality thing. I completely get it. I get why people do it, because it bloody works. Like you said, it works, and you get hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens, if not hundreds of thousands of followers, particularly on YouTube or Twitter, if you can force the personality. But I always just feel like it's a short-term game for a long-term loss, because you just find yourself, and I've seen it so many times, you just find yourself in 2 or 3 years' time questioning why you did it and feeling trapped by your own fake personality and feeling trapped by the fact that you've got to talk about this particular thing because you built a niche around, I don't know, books or something like that. You've got to talk about books for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel like a good long-term play to me. No.
Makes sense. I mean, putting yourself into a kind of prison that's made of, niche or a certain type of personality, that's going to ultimately lead to burnout, and it's going to make you kind of feel a sense that you're banging your head against the wall. That's going to take out of your ability to expand and to keep coming up with new creative content, because you kind of, over time, you're going to start not looking forward to the process, which is key for content creation. You want to make sure that there are all kinds of avenues that you can follow. And if you're following the same formula and you're restricting yourself to a certain set number of, topics or one niche, which I see a lot of people doing, they're not going to last very long. You're right. It's not a very enticing way to stay in the game. So you want to, as a content creator, you want to make it interesting for yourself with each one. So things like not having a specific set outcome for any one video is what's helped me, for example. Like, I don't really know what I'm going to say before I say it, but at the same time, there is the danger of falling into like a kind of rambly, too long video. So I think for me, the process is about finding that balance, which is for me a form of mastery in itself. It's like, how can I get better at bringing kind of a certain spontaneity and organicness to the process of creation. So I'm not boring myself through it, but at the same time, I'm not boring the viewer as well by making the video go on too long type thing. So it's a constant process of exploration and discovery, which is fun for me.
Have you tried podcasting before? Have you ever explored that?
I have, yeah. I had a podcast that I was kind of doing a solo kind of monologue for through Red Lemon Club, one of my previous blogs. That was, when was that? Like 4 or 5 years ago. That kind of lasted like 18, 19 episodes, and that kind of petered out. And then I did another podcast interview show maybe a couple of years ago, interviewing a few people, and just sort of, I don't know what it was down to that I gave up on it. Probably just wanting to move on to the next shiny thing and kind of finding excuses. I did keep the videos going, and I find that structure, that setup is appealing to me, because it means that I can just take my iPhone and just, whenever I have a spontaneous idea, I can film that, which is the way I like to do things. But I'm not closed to the idea of continuing on with a bit of podcasting and interviewing and that kind of stuff.
I get looking at your YouTube. Well, you've got quite a lot of followers on Twitter too, but looking at your YouTube, you've got more than the average with a couple of thousand. So YouTube was obviously kind of a priority or a focus at some point. Is it still like that
now? I'm always thinking about, what role is YouTube playing in my life at the moment? Is it worth doing it? For me, yes, I've got a decent number of followers on there, but I think more than anything, it's more about my own self-growth, really. It sounds a little bit selfish, but one of the main reasons for continuing on with the YouTube channel is just to have a platform that I can explore my own thinking through and get better at communication, that kind of stuff. But I think more than anything, it's just a place that I can kind of spew out whatever random ideas I have and try to keep it as contained and useful as possible, so that I just get better at delivering and presenting ideas. And at the same time, elevating my brand and my name and getting, potentially new clients and that kind of stuff. So there are many reasons, but I'm always, I think that's partly the reason I enjoy doing it, because there's always a question hanging in the air around, like, what's the purpose behind this? And the thing is, there are just so many sort of variables to it. It's just been an interesting kind of adventure, seeing what comes out of it.
It's interesting you say selfish, because I think about that a lot, and I used to feel a little bit guilty about it, because I really only started doing any kind of online promotion or marketing or whatever you really want to call it probably a year and a half ago now, and I started with Twitter, and I kind of got sidelined by the whole idea of providing value and writing these kind of threads and removing the personality, the kind of thing we began this conversation starting. And over time, I realized I was starting to get burnt out by it and not enjoying doing it anymore. And then I did start thinking about it a bit deeper, and I thought, this has to be for me. And if I don't make this about me, I won't stick with it. And if I don't make it about me, it won't be interesting, and people won't watch it. And it's kind of weird, isn't it? Because you think, I need to make something useful for somebody to sit there and watch or listen to or read. But the best things I've ever written or recorded have been things that have 100% been selfish for me. Like, I've just come up with the idea and gone, right, I want to talk about that. No thinking about an audience, no thinking about how it might help somebody else. But they have, and they've been the best pieces. And now I purely follow that kind of heuristic when I'm making anything. I don't think about the value first. I don't think about who can I share this with or who this might connect with. I literally think about something that I want to make, and I make it.
I guess there must be some influence of having an awareness of an audience that plays a role in that. I think when I have an idea for a piece of content and I look forward to creating it, I look forward to writing it or making it, there is a kind of very distant concept of an audience there, which I look forward to sharing. That's the reason I put it online. It's the reason I upload all of this stuff. It's the reason all of us tweet. It's because I think we're kind of guided by, attracted to the idea of helping people, but maybe in an abstract way. But you're right. I think 95% of the driving force behind the creation is just an idea that we connect with ourselves. And that's the best we can do, really, because we only really know ourselves, don't we? We know we're kind of experiencing our own experience. So that's a great place that's a great container within which to create content which is working for you, doing stuff that resonates, connects with you. Because if it connects with you and if you feel some kind of a connection to the creative process, then you know, especially having done it for years, you'll know that people will tend to respond better to that. Mm. And if you're trying to do it the other way around, which is to kind of start off with, all right, what's the kind of thing that this sort of audience will connect with? You're only adding additional pressure. It's like you can't really guess what that's going to be like because you're stepping out of that. You're just kidding yourself, right? You're not speaking to your own emotional experience. It's like I'm just guessing, and of course that's what creates a disconnect, and it's no longer fun if you're trying to plan something for, in a kind of, you're kind of going through it in a blind way. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So that's great advice for anyone who's creating anything. And this has been a question that's come up a lot. It's like, do you create it for them, for an audience, a market, a target market, or do you create it for yourself? And I still think it's not necessarily 100% for you. I think there is some role for an idea of an audience to be played in this. I think, for example, once you do a lot of stuff and you create a lot of content, you start to get a very rough idea of the kinds of things that connect well with people. So that can play a little bit of a role. It's like, what kinds of things tend to do well, that can feature in my creative process. But more than anything else, you want to write for yourself. You want to make for yourself. Yeah,
I know what you mean. Yes, there is an element of an audience, but for me, because I've been a designer and because I've been in marketing for so long, for like 16 years, a lot of that intuitively comes to me. So the audience isn't really the first or the second concern, or even the third one. It's kind of like a distant concept somewhere back here, because you kind of know it, don't you? You know it more intuitively the more time you've done it. But one of the big changes I made was to talk about things that only I have experienced, which you kind of touched on, because only then can it feel genuine. You can say the same things as what everybody else has said, but when you're saying it because you've lived it, people somehow intuitively know that you're saying it from a place of experience, rather than doing it the other way around, like you said, where you focus on, I am targeting niche X, and niche X enjoys reading articles about niche X, so I will write about this. It for me isn't a sustainable way of doing that kind of thing. If you want to keep enjoying,
makes sense, because you're kind of operating based on assumption, aren't you? You're kind of writing or creating based on what you think someone else might connect with, as opposed to directly kind of plugging it into your own self. And you're only doing your audience a disservice by doing that, because you're creating distance between what you know to be true and their receipt of the content. It's like it's going to be crap, basically. So it is. And I think that there could be a bit of a sliding scale aspect to this, which is like, people who are just starting out in creating whatever they're creating. I think there's probably a bit of a process to go through in terms of like getting a feel for what other humans tend to resonate with. Yes. And then, the more you kind of get that feel for it, which is what you've obviously been through, and I've been through it as well, through, hundreds of articles and creating hundreds of illustrations or stuff like that, that you do start getting a feel for it. And it becomes, it's like, driving a car. You wouldn't be able to manually explain how you're doing it, but you kind of get a feel for it. And so once you've got a feel for something, then it becomes a lot easier to just let go and just do it for yourself.
I think in that early stage, what many people do in that early stage is very specifically try to find a niche, and to the point where they won't write or create anything until they've found that niche. What I did the other way around, and what I've seen work best for other people, is to just create anything and everything and get the reps in and get the practice in, so you can understand what does resonate, what you actually want to create, what you enjoy, instead of doing it the other way around, where you're kind of quite precious about the fact that the first thing I make needs to be perfect, because it isn't gonna be. Even now, I've made thousands of bloody podcasts, nearly 1,000 images, doodles like what you do, and written loads of blog posts, and still now, I only feel like an amateur a lot of this, right? So,
yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, especially that beginner mindset. I often wonder with a lot of people where this is where the niche stuff is really difficult, I think, because it isn't as simple as Money Twitter likes to make it out, or it isn't as simple as most people on Twitter like it to make it out. This is the same as anything, really. Twitter is not a place for nuance. It's not really a place to get any deep and meaningful advice. But I don't think it's as simple as just telling somebody, go find a niche and go make some content for that niche. There is so much more nuance to it than that, and it isn't as simple as just finding an audience and making content for that audience either. There's somewhere in between, I think. There's some kind of balance of artistry versus marketing versus the perfect storm of all these things coming together that makes that thing that people actually want to sit and watch or read or consume. It isn't as simple as just following one of any of those things and doing it. But that's not the kind of thing you can tweet, is it?
No, it's definitely not. But you might be able to find a way to kind of squeeze it into a well proportioned tweet. But you're right. I mean, starting off with like a niche kind of hanging over you as a new creator, maybe you followed something in a book written by someone who's already way down the line, right? And they're talking about, make sure you've got a clear audience in mind, you've got your little niche, and you've got a focal point. That might be taking quite a lot away from someone who needs to experience that breadth of experimentation in the early days, as you say. Like it is key. I remember looking back on a lot of what I've been doing, and it might look as if I've got my shit together in certain aspects in terms of what I create. But actually, if you look back over the trajectory, especially in the early days, for it to have gotten to where it's gotten, there was a lot of just throwing a load of stuff down onto a table and choosing the best bits and seeing what resonated with me personally. And there was a lot of articles written and a lot of tweets posted that I hated, that didn't do very well, that fell flat, deleted, and no one really sees that. So you're right, like experimenting is a key part of the process, and niche doesn't speak very well to the idea of experimentation. It's like, I guess, I don't know whether niches are something that we should include at all, really, but if you're talking about a niche, that's kind of like a stage or two down the line from experimentation, isn't it?
I actually think we're quite well aligned as well with the way that we approach Twitter and a lot of these things. We don't just do one thing. You've got YouTube. I've got a much less successful YouTube than you, but I've got YouTube. You've got YouTube. You doodle things. I doodle things. You write tweets. I write tweets, and all the sporadic parts don't really fit together, do they? It isn't a simple kind of, I have, for example, I run a design agency. I haven't got a podcast about design that I'm only exclusively doing, and I'm not just tweeting about design, and I'm not just I very rarely tweet about design or marketing, to be perfectly honest. It isn't niched down in that simplistic term, and you're kind of the same with the way that you approach it. But the thing I've always had in the back of the mind, which has proved true over this year and a half, is that if somebody's looking for example, a designer like me, they're not looking on Twitter to connect with somebody who just talks about design, because they don't want to read particularly about design, but they would connect with somebody who is talking about bigger, potentially more important things, who has a personality, and then occasionally reminds you that they're a designer and shows that they're a designer.
That's key.
That kind of tactics worked better for me than if I would have just purely spoken about design, never veered from the topic. I actually think that I'd encourage a lower level of client to come to me, because you're almost cheapening what you do by only exclusively talking about what you do. That might sound strange, but in my experience, it kind of comes across as that on Twitter.
That makes sense. I mean, given that personality and depth, and being someone who delivers a message that resonates, that has value, a lot of value in and of itself. So if you lack that, if your content lacks that personality, that depth, then you are literally cheapening the product. You are cheapening the content, you could say. That makes a lot of sense to me. If I come across someone who just sort of tweets flat tweets and there isn't a huge amount of depth, then I would immediately assume that they're probably a cheaper product, perhaps, maybe subconsciously. So by seemingly doing the right thing, following the rule book and saying, okay, I'm going to focus on a niche, and perhaps this is the way that the gurus say that we should do things. I'm going to do that because that's going to be better for business. Actually, it turns out it's worse for business because it drains all the personality and interest and juice out of what you create, because you're so bored with your own process.
Yeah, I think so. I actually did speak about this quite a lot on my old design podcast. I did used to have a design podcast, Alex.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
But it was between me and another guy called Richard Baird, and we barely spoke about design. We actually spoke about the deeper issues around design, or selling design, or all that kind of thing. Went into depth, and we spoke about it a lot on that. And I always said, and Richard agreed, that it'd be, even though money Twitter and places like that have kind of completely devalued talking about stoicism or anything like that, it's actually more value, I think, to set your stall out and say, I am a designer, but talk about stoicism, because it gives you depth and it gives you personality. If we're talking about, like pure plays here, following the rule book type thing, it would be better for me to say I am a designer and talk about stoicism and, I don't know, life improvement or something like that, because people can see that I'm not just a bloody stupid designer. It adds depth to the kind of thing. It's obviously kind of important to what you do too, but the kind of thing that you do is a bit deeper already. But the thing that I do is often cheapened because it's kind of seen as a commodity almost. It is a weird one.
Talking about design and marketing, that kind of stuff, or
design's a commodity, really, isn't it? Right. And marketing's a little bit more woolly, but design is generally seen as a commodity. Especially if you go over to Instagram, for example, there's people with millions of followers on Instagram, designers with millions of followers. I know a few of them, and they get messaged all the time about logo work, and people won't pay more than $500. So there's kind of a mismatch somewhere there, that somebody's got millions of followers on Instagram. You'd assume that they'd be commanding high prices, but they're not, because they never talk about the underlying process of the thing that they're doing, or they never talk about the reasons of why they're doing the things they're doing. All they're doing is putting really pretty pictures online and assuming that people are going to connect the dots of their expertise.
Mm.
and people don't.
Yeah, well, I think what you're seeing is when you've got a designer who's only sharing their designs, you're seeing someone who's lacking. Again, I think it's that depth thing, isn't it? Because you're not giving yourself room as a designer to share about stuff and life that interests you beyond the design. So I suppose, there's less space for sharing stuff that you're passionate about that goes beyond design, and in doing that you kind of limit yourself as a human in a way. You kind of drain the personality out of that a little bit, and I guess that's potentially what's going to influence a potential client's vision of who you are in their minds. They'll see you as someone who only talks about design, and perhaps there's a little bit of a sense of roboticness in that because they see you only sharing one thing, and you might be passionate about design, but there's all this other stuff that you're kind of bottling in because you're kind of staying in line with this niche. And that could, in a funny kind of subconscious way, influence someone's perceived idea of how valuable the product is, because you're just this one-dimensional character. You haven't got this added bit of flavor about you and your character, perhaps. I mean, that's just me trying to figure that out. But I think it's an interesting topic, isn't it? Because we're talking about, the difference between, really thriving in business versus just plodding along on a kind of low level. And to be aware of that kind of stuff, even though it seems seemingly arbitrary in a way, it's actually could be quite crucial. It's like, and I think it comes down to like what is actually bringing you, the creator, to life. I think people can sense that lifeness or lack of it. And so if you're doing stuff that sort of drains you a little bit and just kind of becomes like a process, like a rote kind of tedium, then people, I think, sense that, especially given the nature of social media these days. It's so packed, and we've got such a strong sense now of like different personalities and who's doing this and that. I think you can really tell who stands out. It's easy to see those people who are alive, who are standing out. And I think those are the people who are going to build those followings. I think we're going through a shift at the moment.
Yeah, I agree, actually. I think we are going through a shift. I'm personally definitely going through a shift of becoming sick of a lot of these kind of tactics things. And I'm also seeing a lot of other people do it too. The thing I've always seen over my entire marketing career is something of a curve like this. Somebody will begin at the very bottom. So let's take just a simple creator as an example. It doesn't matter what they do. They'll start at the bottom and talk very specifically about the thing that they do. Very specifically, just like we were discussing. The only thing they talk about online is the niche. Call it the niche.
Yeah.
Then as followers increase and success increases, and usually money too, they start to get a little bit sick of it because they're talking about the same thing all the time. They get bored. And then you kind of hit somewhere, and this is different for everybody, and then you hit kind of what you might feel is your peak audience amount of numbers that you can physically handle. You might get sick of replying to people on Twitter all the time. You might get sick of replying to YouTube comments. Whatever it is, there'll be something that makes you crack. And then when you get to that point, you start to do something that I like to call destroying your audience, where you become sick of everything and you start talking about all kinds of things. And at this crucial point here is the point where the real person appears. And that's when you really start to get interested in following the person. If you follow the person at the very beginning of the creator journey, or even in the middle, they'll be providing very good value or advice. Normally, the content will be good. That's why they're going up on this upwards trajectory. But there's just something more human about the person who is at the top destroying their audience, who is actually becoming human, who isn't bothered about the metrics and the figures, who's actually talking about the things that really make them passionate about. And I see that pattern over and over and over. A couple of examples. Ed Latimore on Twitter, he was always tweeting aphorisms, really good bloody aphorisms. I think he was one of the best people on Twitter when he first started doing that. He was one of the first who really started writing objectively good tweets that I saw. And at some point, I think it was maybe 60 or 70,000 followers, he started to get sick of just purely writing aphorisms. And then he started dropping a few jokes in. And now he's at 130,000 followers or something. And he's pretty much joking all of the time. And to me, it's much better for it because he's human. And then somebody like Jack Butcher too. He used to purely tweet amazing tweets. I'd say that Jack Butcher is probably one of the best tweeters, which is a weird thing to say. Probably one of the best short form writers I've ever seen in terms of the way that he crafts them, the way that he just writes them perfect to go viral, essentially. And that's why he went from 0 to 100,000 followers pretty quickly. And then I think it was, again, at about 100,000 followers, he just started being a little bit funny and a little bit more human, to the point now where he's deep into NFTs like most of us are, and he's just joking. He's just joking about everything now. There's no seriousness there whatsoever. I see that curve over and over and over. I always think it's better when they reach the top.
I think I'm on my way. I'm not quite in the joke phase yet. I mean, I throw a few in, but I can feel it coming, because there is a little bit of frustration that can come up through just sticking to your guns and retweeting the same kinds of ideas, and you can get into that flow of repetitiveness.
Yes.
So I can feel it coming. I can feel the cracks forming. But I think what we're seeing is a kind of like a moment where you realize that you haven't really got much to lose, right? And that's when the creativity starts coming in. That's when you can kind of relax a little bit. So it's sort of like we're dealing with two types of value. We've got the value of just like being totally all in, focused on creating well-crafted tweets in this case. And the value is there. People like it because it's like you've got your attention on it and you're taking care and you're crafting it. And then there's a moment, as you say, where you kind of flip around and you kind of get whatever it is, you get a bit sick of it, or you just sort of, you feel that you've got enough success under your belt so that you can now relax a little bit and kind of just open up a little bit. And that's a new kind of value, isn't it? It's almost as if you've got a different personality in there, but people have seen your process, so they know what you are capable of, but they can also enjoy this new version of you. So, I see it all the time. But I know what you mean. It's authenticity, isn't it? There's an appeal in that. Just someone being willing to just let go and not care as much.
Yeah. There absolutely is, and it's interesting because I always wonder if somebody like, to take the same examples, Jack Butcher and Ed Latimore, would have done it the other way around. So if they would have started with being funny, irreverent, not that serious, just joking around, would they have built the same audience? Probably not. They probably wouldn't have done.
I don't think so,
no.
I doubt it.
And it's just it's a strange old journey that we all find ourselves, we have to go on, where we have to remove the personality, shackle it a little bit, maybe, straitjacket it just a tiny bit, and then as we go on and we feel more comfortable, and our audience and people who are coming on along with us feel more comfortable with us, we can start to remove it a little bit, and then by the end of it, your shirt's off, you're swinging it around your head, and there's no seriousness left. I'm always thinking, is there kind of a way, and this is kind of the point that I'm at now, because I got to 5,000 followers and I was already sick of it. And I thought 5,000 followers, stick in the mud, that's enough for me. I'm going to stop being the way that I was before and open myself up a bit. And now I feel like I'm in a position where I can continue to do it. And I think that's quite important. I can continue to be myself, and I can continue to just create things all day, every day because I enjoy it. As long as you don't miss that point, I think that's quite important. As long as you don't miss the point where you start getting really sick of the things that you're creating. Obviously, the worst thing that you can do is build a following of 80,000 people, say Twitter or whatever, and you are so sick of it that you just quit. And you've got this big following and you just don't want to do anything with it anymore because you've kind of burned out from doing it. So
Yeah,
careful.
there is a big risk of that for many. Yeah, perhaps it's just a part of the evolution that people need to go through if they want to stick with whatever platform they're on. And people are at risk if they're not willing to traverse into that new let go kind of, take the piss phase. There's a risk of them just getting so sick of it that they might end up leaving. So maybe it's just it's part of a set, very expected, as you say, kind of curve or evolution that people, maybe not everyone goes through, but I think a lot of people who don't go through that kind of flip could be at higher risk of just getting sick of it and leaving.
I think we're seeing it accelerate now. You alluded to it, this kind of new kind of creator. And I think we're going to get to the inevitable part of where we're about to talk about NFTs. Sorry, Alex. I think...
I'll try my best.
We won't go too deep into technologies because I don't know them either. But what's interesting from a marketing point of view, putting my marketing wanker hat on for a minute, is the fact that it seems to be, to me, that NFTs and crypto is aligning with this kind of new kind of creator at the same time. And it's lovely to see, because what's happening is people are kind of proving themselves through crypto or NFTs. And then because they've proven themselves, because they've made a lot of money, or because they've launched a project, they don't feel the need to conform to the rules that we've just been talking about. They don't need to be serious, even from the very beginning, because they've proved themselves already, literally on the blockchain, and you can look up their wallet and see how much money they've got or their successful project, and you can see it all live. And it means that we've kind of got these free spirits online that still are providing good value or good content or whatever you want to call it, but they're not shackled by that same thing that we've just been talking about. And I'm seeing that happen more and more, especially now as I get deeper and deeper into NFTs. These people who have made a killing in NFTs not conforming to these rules, even from the very beginning, and it's very nice to see, I must admit.
So there's something to be said about a kind of sense of achievement that's been reached, that looks like there's been a parallel drawn between what we've been talking about before and this. People who've done well successfully with NFTs, maybe they've sold a good chunk. They've sort of, I guess, their kind of vision of who they are has shifted a little bit. They're no longer this sort of fresh-faced person who's new onto the scene of NFTs. They're no longer new to it. They've seen some success and they feel a little bit of a rise in themselves. And with that, in the same way that someone who's seen some success through, could have been very formulaic tweets, but they've seen the success, they've seen the growth in their audience, they've also kind of achieved a similar sense of success. And with that, in the same way, they've kind of been able to relax and kind of do their own thing. And that's probably what we're seeing, as a kind of sense of like, okay, I've looks like I've figured something out here. Let's relax a little bit. Let's feel like I've kind of found who I am as well. I'm not kind of second guessing. I'm no longer kind of like putting all this pressure on myself. I feel like I've kind of found my little space here. So let me relax. And I think that the conversation, really what we're having, is kind of ultimately about creativity, isn't it? It's about like how to get to a state or a place where you're no longer kind of interfering with your own ability to kind of express yourself and relax. That seems to be what this conversation is kind of the central thread is, right? And then ultimately how that engages with their audience. And people who tend to be more relaxed and more expressive and more creative tend to have a stickier audience, right? I think that's what we're talking about, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I have gone through that exact journey in a very, very quick 1.5 years. even, well, I've been podcasting for longer than that. So I've been podcasting for about 4 years. And when I first started podcasting, I started a podcast about design, business, and marketing. And it was terrible. It was a terrible podcast, and it was very stuffy and formulaic and just boring. And then I started this podcast, but the first 170 episodes, I think it was, of this was solo episodes, like what you did. And they were a little bit less stuffy, but I was talking about self-improvement and things that I thought was objectively valuable. So there was a thing in my head that I was thinking, more than myself, what is going to be valuable for somebody else rather than what's going to be valuable for me. And then this kind of leads full circle to probably about 3 months ago, where I started a new podcast called The Wednesday Audio, which is just stupid. Essentially, it's a fever dream of a podcast that is kind of a comedy podcast, basically. But I would never have done that as the first podcast. I would have never have dared to essentially be myself. That's all I'm doing, being myself online 4 years ago, which is so strange, isn't it? So strange, because you feel like you have to not be yourself online for people to pay attention to you, and then eventually you realize at some point in the future, when you come back around full circle, you realize, oh, it's me. It's me that people like. It's not necessarily even the thing that I'm talking about. It's me. It's such a weird revelation.
Yeah, I suppose there might be a few fortunate ones who are able to start something new and already deliver a lot of that personality and that kind of relaxed expressiveness that can take a while for others. But I think in general, it looks as though there is a kind of an evolution that we go through, and there's absolutely no shame for anyone who's starting out to wonder why they haven't reached that kind of level of like chill, which they're looking for, which their audience is looking for. It takes a while. It takes months and years. And I guess the more you create, the more you do, the more the quicker you're going to get to that.
Yes. Even this.
Interesting. Yeah.
Even what we're doing right now isn't really that easy to somebody who first starts creating. And I think that's obviously a problem with a lot of society, that things look easier than they actually are. And particularly with Twitter, you see a good tweet and you think, well, it can't be that hard to write. And then you realize when you've written thousands of them that aren't as good, that it is actually quite hard to write 380 good characters.
Yeah, it really is an art. And it takes a lot of mistakes and a lot of willingness to make repeated mistakes, to look stupid. And that really, for me, makes a difference. And if you're willing to kind of stay with it, I'm starting to sound like my own tweets. You're willing to stay with it long enough and go through all those mistakes. Sounds cliche, of course, but that's what's going to separate those who kind of stick around and those who experience the full spectrum of that evolution, which very few will get to, I think. Most are kind of bombarded with too much failure and too much of a sense of self-judgment to ever get to that point where they can just go, you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to relax, which is what people are looking for.
Yeah. So when's the point? You said you're not there yet, but when's the point where you start doing it? It could be something to do with like the containers that we're working in. I think there might be little evolutionary spectrums that exist within different social platforms, right? So I might have achieved it on something like YouTube, but I don't think I'm kind of at that kind of let go place on Twitter yet. I know that I've got a fair few followers and stuff, but I still feel like very much a beginner, and I still feel like I'm still figuring it out, because I kind of feel like I took quite a lot of time away from Twitter, and I think things have changed so much that I feel like I've just kind of jumped in again on a new thing. So for me, it feels like I'm in that kind of first Ed Latimore, first year of just figuring it out and putting out as much as I can and getting a sense of what clicks and what doesn't. And then
just waiting for that frustration to kick in so I can start taking the piss out of everyone. It seems as if you're going through that phase at the moment, right?
I am. It didn't take me very long to get to that stage, to be perfectly honest. I think it took me about. If I think back to the trajectory, I started tweeting, taking Twitter seriously, as I would have called it back then, and I was writing 10 tweets per day, aphorisms, Ed Latimore type tweets, and it took me probably
platitudes.
Yeah, platitudes. It took me probably 3 months to get very bored of that. And what I started doing at that point was some days I'd go, oh, I don't want to fucking do this again. And I just wrote whatever came to my fingertips. And those kind of tweets, whilst not always doing better in terms of likes or anything like that, I enjoyed them more and I got more interaction. And then what I kind of noticed after doing a couple more months of that was that when I jumped on Zoom calls with people, a little bit like what we're doing now, people would say to me, which I found quite surprising, people would say to me, you know what, you're exactly like your tweets. And when people said that to me, I thought, well, that's the job done, isn't it? The whole point, I think it was Benjamin George that said this on one of the last podcasts that I did with him. He said the whole point of Twitter is to kind of give somebody a feeling of what you are, almost like a business card, but a 3D business card. So somebody could just go to your Twitter profile right now and just scroll up and down it and read maybe 20 of your tweets and instantly synthesize your personality, really.
Yeah. With a caveat, I think once you've gotten to that later stage in the evolution, I think that's when the business card becomes more real. I think a lot of people are in a kind of earlier stage, including me, it feels, where I haven't yet had that kind of sense of luxury to be able to just sort of let go and write whatever I want, because I'm still trying to figure out what works. And for me, that kind of pushes me, I think, towards just I want to exhaust the platitudes first, and then but I'm getting close. I think I can feel the pushback from what comes out of sharing, meaningful enough tweets, but it just doesn't feel like there's enough in it. There's not enough of a breadth to the range of stuff as well. There's not enough humor in it. So I'm getting there.
I mean, humor is not right for everybody, is it? If you're not a naturally funny guy, or if you're not, if you're naturally a serious person, you should be tweeting seriously. If you naturally take yourself quite seriously, that's the way that your Twitter should be. A little bit like, Naval type thing, I guess. But if you are if you are irreverent and you don't take much seriously, and you take very little seriously, like me, then that's really, for me, the kind of flavor that should be coming across. I think a lot of people tend to look at, for example, Naval and go, I want to tweet like Naval. But you're not Naval, and you'll never be Naval, because you are you, and that is literally a tweet I've tweeted about 20 times. You need to be more of yourself, with caveats. Obviously, there's certain limits to the Twitter format that you need to stick to, but I think there's more variance in that than a lot of people realize. The thing that I often do these days is I'll write a serious tweet, then the very next tweet, as in I'll reply to my own tweet, so make a mini thread basically. The very next tweet will be something silly or poking fun at myself for tweeting that kind of thing. And I feel like for me, at least my personality, that feels very genuine. It doesn't feel like I'm trying to fake it or play a character. And I think really it's finding that thing for everybody, isn't it? It's finding that thing for you, just that signature. That little signature that you need to put on something.
Yeah, and it takes a bit of practice. It takes doing it. Just takes diving in. And I think what we're looking for is just, I guess, the guidelines for what works is if it connects with it, if it makes you smile, if there's some kind of an emotional buzz through writing it, if it feels like it isn't you, if it feels like you're just trying hard, you'll know it, and your reader's going to feel it as well.
Yeah.
And I've tried on many occasions to try. I had a voice in my head saying you should be funnier on Twitter, and I would sort of write something that I thought would be funny, and it just fell completely flat because I was trying to be funny. So that kind of stuff definitely doesn't work. So but then there are other occasions when I've written something that's felt funny, I've laughed at it, and it's done well. So you just got to kind of go off your own. It's got to feel right, and the more of this stuff that you do, the more you're going to get a sense of what feels right. So it's very like people kind of take this out of feelings and stuff, but like a lot of this is a kind of a feelings based thing, isn't it? So it sounds a little bit soppy, but I think that's kind of the way to go, isn't it? But not too much, less formula, yeah, and more just feeling your way through. If it feels right, if it feels funny, or whatever it is, powerful.
I agree.
Put it down.
I specifically use feelings almost exclusively, and kind of I don't know, a gut feeling or a sense or something that I'm going in the right direction. Or there'll be outside things that show me that maybe I'm going in the right direction. For example, when I switched from writing exclusively platitudes to maybe being a little less serious, people started commenting on things more. And I thought, right, people are talking to me now. People don't feel afraid to interact with the tweets. I'm coming across as a bit more human. And that was one thing. I thought that was kind of a thing in my head that ticked and went, right, okay, you've changed it enough for people to understand that you're a human, not just a stream of content that people just get to sit back and not consume, not interact with. And then another thing that kind of came up like that recently for me was I queued up a load of tweets. I went into Hype Fury and I queued up 30 tweets or something like that. And by the end of it, they were getting very kind of platitudey and very boring. And one of the first tweets that came out, the second it posted, somebody replied, one of my friends on Twitter, and he said, "Where's the real Craig gone?" I'm like, yes, that's perfect. That's exactly what I want to see. If I want people to hold me to account if they see something, and not only hold me to account, not be afraid to take the piss out of me for being a little bit not like me. I think you've kind of got to the right place when you're like that. But a lot of those things I just said, they're completely feelings. They're gut reactions. There's no metrics to those.
Yeah, it's difficult to kind of define exactly how to reproduce it. I guess when you've been out and about, that tends to be helpful. You're out on a walk and you've got a kind of moment of insight. I guess whenever your mind is a little bit stiller, that tends to be quite conducive to tweeting and writing and creating better. It's like you're not thinking, you're not trying too hard. And I think when you find yourself in a moment where you're listing out literally 30 tweets, you're going to get to a point where you're pushing it a little bit and you're going to be overthinking it.
Yes.
So I think it also comes down to how you collect ideas. Like you get better at that as well over time, right? So like over time, you'll start realizing that, okay, I'm going to need to carry a notebook around, because if I'm going to show up at my desk and force myself to write 20 tweets, that's not going to happen. It's going to be flat tweets. I'm going to have to try and find a way to capture those moments where a great insight comes to mind and it feels right. So a lot of Twitter for me is about capturing spontaneously decent tweets, getting better at that, and capturing those good tweets.
Spontaneity is really important, I think, and it's massively underrated, particularly on Twitter. And I say this as a person who fiercely schedules nearly all of his tweets. But there's always a thing. I've never really known how to put this into words properly, so this might not come out right. But
see how we go.
Yeah, over a long period of time, like I said, 16 years of messing with marketing for clients, I've always I've always done a lot of talks and things like that as well, a lot of kind of public speaking. There's always when there's an element of danger, things are more interesting. So people can intuitively recognize that, and I think people can intuitively recognize that on Twitter too. Not so the way that I use this, particularly just take this podcast, for example. I prepared 2 questions. I haven't asked you either of them. And there's a danger that can be kind of palpably felt. There's a palpable danger to what's going on. And it was even more dangerous when it was live streamed as well. And that makes it interesting. That makes people want to watch it because there's potentially something going to go wrong. It's the F1 car crash type situation. But it also puts us both on edge and kind of fires us up a little bit. And I think that's the same with Twitter. I think people can tell intuitively when a thing doesn't have the dangerous energy around it, that it hasn't been a spontaneous thought that you've had on a walk or, that's just popped into your head and you've tweeted. Even if you've queued it, I don't think queuing it really matters, but they can tell when the idea wasn't spontaneous. And you can't plan that. You can't plan that. You can't force that. That's the difficulty. That one thing there, not to just keep heaping praise on Jack, but that one thing there was the thing that I think made Jack's tweets so special, that they were spontaneous thoughts. He never, as far as I'm aware, over-engineered them too much. He wasn't looking at 30 tweets for inspiration and then trying to rewrite them, basically. It was a spontaneous thing that came from experience or knowledge or something that he'd seen. And then in that moment, you write the perfect tweet and it never comes again.
And that kind of thing is clearly a priority for someone like Jack. I mean, at a certain point, he would have said to himself, I'm going to make sure that every tweet that goes out, I connect with personally, isn't some manufactured rehash of another tweet, part of his strategy. And that's key as well, isn't it? Because it's ultimately about raising that value, making your stuff good, making it resonate. And so I'd be willing to bet he had a pretty good system of collecting his spontaneous ideas well, and then collecting those and then running those through his Hype Fury or whatever. Interesting you talk about the dangerous aspect. I wonder, would you equate a tweet with a feeling of danger around it to the types of spontaneous tweets that you get when you go walking? Could you define those as dangerous? Or is that different?
Yeah.
Because they both work.
Yeah. No, I think you do. I think you can define it as dangerous. I think maybe spontaneity.
What it might be hinting at then is maybe there's something about truth in it.
Yeah.
So the danger is reflecting a truth, but you can also have a non-dangerous truth, perhaps.
Yes.
That you pick up when you go walking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's the element of it that you don't know whether it's going to do really well or not. You don't know whether people are going to get it. It's kind of a slightly, potentially a slightly subversive idea, something that hasn't been proven before. Maybe somebody said it before, but it hasn't been proven before. Just like me trying to explain this idea of danger. It's something that's a little bit different, and only I could say it in that particular way. It's certainly not an original idea, but only I could have come up with it and said it that way. And if I was to tweet it right now, it would feel quite new. Whereas if I would have done the kind of the other thing that even I do sometimes, but I know a lot of people do it more than I do, where they kind of look at tweet inspiration and you go, right, I know that tweet did well, so I'm going to rewrite that tweet ever so slightly, and then I know that the tweet is going to do well. There's kind of just a perfection to it that isn't interesting to a lot of people. It'll do well, get a lot of likes and get a lot of retweets, but coming right back to the beginning, is there just something missing? Is there the personality missing? Does that really say something about you when it doesn't have that unique piece of danger or personality inside it? You know what I mean? A bit of an esoteric idea.
It's tricky with Twitter because, I think with Twitter it's tricky because you're dealing with such a limited amount of words and a limited amount of space that you probably can take an idea that was dangerous initially and did really well, and maybe, you know, invited criticism, those types of tweets tend to do very well, the ones that are a bit polarizing. And you could take that tweet, having seen it done well, and then shift it a little bit, and it can do as well or even better. But I think the reason that works is because you're able to, within the small container of Twitter, to kind of emulate emotion and within a small limited space. You can't really do that so easily on a longer form video, for example. I think there's something to the kind of limit of Twitter that allows you to kind of make little shifts, and it will probably have a strong impact. But you're right, like you don't want to play with that too much, because you want every tweet to be as original as possible.
Well, it's about playing to the medium, isn't it? You're absolutely right. On Twitter, you're so limited that that's the way it's got to be done. But then when we come to a medium like YouTube or podcasting, this is what I was kind of getting at earlier with the whole, you are, with Twitter, the advantage of the medium is that it's 380 characters. It's quick, it's lacks nuance by design. That's all the things that Twitter is. The very fact with podcasts is it doesn't lack nuance. That's the whole point of podcasting. So the whole point of podcasting is we essentially have an infinite amount of time to discuss something. Obviously, we don't, but if you and I sat down, we have quite a long amount of time, 60 minutes, whatever. That's a long time to talk about a topic with nuance, and I think we've done that. So if you apply another medium to podcasting like Twitter, where you try to be brief and you lose all the nuance, you aren't really taking advantages of the medium whatsoever. If you try to make a shortened down, edited, very interview heavy style podcast, you're losing the advantage of the medium. And I think I feel like the same goes with YouTube as well. The advantage is you potentially have a set amount of time that people like to watch a video, and if you kind of fall outside of that, and you lose the purpose of the medium. It's a careful balance.
You want to be aware of the medium. You want to be aware of it and make the most of it. A lot of people are potentially misusing it, and because they're not turning the medium into the springboard that it can be, allowing their content to fall flat because of that. But yeah, it's interesting. But I mean, Twitter's always a good kind of talking point because it kind of acts as a kind of microcosm of all the other ones, and it's like a kind of mini version of a lot of other platforms and media.
Twitter's fascinating. Twitter's very fascinating. I've talked about it on my podcast a lot with a lot of people. I equally hate Twitter as well as much as I love it, because when you choose to follow,
you keep coming back.
yeah. I think when you choose to follow somebody, I can't remember who said this now, but when you choose to follow somebody, you are choosing to be brainwashed by them, and I think that's very true.
Yeah.
And I think Twitter is a very powerful medium like that. That, for example, I see at least a couple of your tweets nearly every day, and that is giving you the opportunity to inject your ideas into my head, and that's pretty damn powerful. There isn't
Job done.
Yeah, there isn't any other medium like that. I don't think there's any other medium like that that's so direct, that's so quick. Obviously, you can share your ideas on other mediums. You can write an email newsletter, write a blog, have YouTube, have an Instagram, but there isn't any that's direct where you follow a person to consume their thoughts and opinions and read them like that. The written word in that case is so direct and so quick, and that's what's so fascinating about Twitter, I think. There just isn't anything else quite like it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of that has to do with the limitation that's set on the size of the amount of the content. And because it's so small, a lot of us are more willing, more welcoming to allowing that content in. Whereas if it was a video, it's much more likely that someone's going to turn away from it, put it on a watch later list or whatever and never get around to seeing it. Whereas with Twitter, it's much easier to kind of hook someone in with a smaller piece of content, right? Hence, everyone's letting a ton of tweets through, and can also, lose hours of their day to letting brainwashing tweets come through the feed. but because of the size, and I think that's a really big aspect of it, because of the small size of it, we're able to get foot indoor more often.
Yeah.
And that leads to other things. That leads to, becoming addicted to somebody's tweets, which might otherwise have not happened if it was a big video or a blog.
Yes.
So
I always see Twitter as kind of a springboard to everything else I do. Everything I do, I put on Twitter, from email newsletters to podcasts to videos to. I always put it on Twitter. I always see it as a springboard, and I think that's probably why I'll always keep it. Whether I'll always tweet as much as I will, probably not. But I'll always keep it because I think it's a perfect place to keep up. Even me using it as a consumer, it's a perfect place for me to keep up with other people that are doing interesting things. There isn't anywhere else I can do that. I can't get, for example, an RSS feed of you and know where everything is. That's what Twitter's really good at as well, I think.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, especially if I share all my content through that. Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating, man.
I think we've come to a natural end.
There we go. That was great. Enjoyed that.
Have you got anything you want to say in this final minute or so? I've started the outro music, so you've got about.
Well, if you're interested in following what I share, go to I am Alex Mathers on Twitter. I think as we spoke about, Twitter is a nice central hub for a lot of what I create. So head over there and follow me there.
Cheers, man. It's been a pleasure, and it's been fun to actually finally sit down and chat.
Likewise, man. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And every time I say this, I always say we should do it again. And I agree. Let's do it again.
Yeah, up for that. Absolutely. Even if we just spoke about Twitter, that'd be good.
I think it could be interesting.
Secondary conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll see.
Things would have changed so much in that time. I'm sure it'd be interesting.
See you soon.
But, yeah. See you, man.